After a hard day's work, Arina went home, where she waited for her unemployed husband, who sat on her neck, and her mother-in-law with a difficult character. But as soon as Arina put the keys in the front door, she heard something that made her freeze. The grey November sky weighed heavily on her, as if deliberately adding to Arina's already oppressive mood. She worked 7 days a week for the second month. The main job is in the accounting department of a large company, plus part-time tutoring in the evenings. Her legs ached with fatigue. Her uncomfortable shoes, which she didn't have time to change before her extra classes, were burning mercilessly. And this rain is endless, damp, cold to the bone. Arina tightened the handle of her umbrella and adjusted her shoulder bag. Today she had to stay longer than usual. The last student couldn't get through the material, and instead of the planned hour and a half, she spent almost 3 hours with him. Now she had to go home, where she would most likely face another round of indifference from her husband and veiled barbs from her mother-in-law. The thought of going home made me feel ambivalent. On the one hand, the comfort of my own apartment; on the other, the people with whom I had to share that comfort. Vadim, her husband, had been unemployed for almost 6 months. At first he tried to do something else, sent out a resume, went on interviews, but each time he came home with a sour face, unchanged. It didn't fit. They need more experience. They will take someone younger. Gradually, his attempts to find a job became sluggish, and the time he spent in front of the computer or TV increased. Arina tried to support her husband, but every day it became more difficult, especially with the growing bills and the need to pay the mortgage. The situation worsened 8 months ago, when Vadim's mother, Nina Petrovna, moved in, domineering, with a prickly look and a habit of saying insults with a sugary smile. She didn't like Arina from the first day they met. At first, the mother-in-law remained relatively neutral, keeping the hairpins to a minimum. But when Vadim lost his job and then could not find another one quickly, Nina Petrovna seemed to break loose. Now it was a rare day without veiled reproaches for her daughter-in-law. Then Arina does not support her son enough, then she works too hard, then she does not pay attention to the family. At the same time, Nina Petrovna herself did nothing to improve the atmosphere in the house. She only complained about life and praised her son's dignity. The mother-in-law claimed that she had sold her apartment to help the young people with the mortgage and household expenses. But Arina's offer to show the documents of the sale and the confirmation of the bank transfer was evaded for some reason, and Vadim sided with his mother. "How can you not trust me? She's not a stranger." Arina hadn't brought up the subject since, but a worm of doubt gnawed at her insides. Lost in unpleasant thoughts, she almost didn't notice how she got to her high-rise building. The entrance to the lobby was dimly lit by a single bulb, flickering and ready to go out. Arina took a deep breath, as if preparing for a dive, and entered the lobby. She took the elevator to the 7th floor and trudged wearily to her apartment at the end of the hall. As she put the key in the lock, she stopped abruptly when she heard the sound of conversation outside the door. Vadim and Nina Petrovna were arguing about something, apparently unaware of her presence. Normally Arina would have turned the key immediately. They were ostentatiously announcing their return, but something in the tone of their voices, unusually tense, almost angry, made her pause. Without knowing why, she held her breath and listened. "How long can you delay?" was my mother-in-law's sharp voice. "The apartment is registered to her. She earns money, and you are just whining and doing nothing. I didn't sell my apartment and give you the money to keep you in this cage. If she finds out about our plan, everything will be ruined." Arina's heart sank painfully. She felt a shiver run down her spine and her palms were sweating despite the cool entrance. What kind of plan is her mother-in-law talking about, and what does it mean that the apartment is registered to her? After all, he and Vadim bought this two-room apartment as joint owners when they got married 5 years ago. However, since the initial payment fell almost entirely on her shoulders, the documents were mainly issued to her. But that does not mean Vadim has no rights to the apartment. Mom, don't push me, Vadim replied irritably. And Arina bitterly realized that it was a tone she hadn't heard from her husband for a long time. There is only polite indifference in their conversations. I'll do everything. But I have to choose the right moment. Arina is no fool. She suspects something. Yesterday she asked for my bank statement and searched my phone. Of course she's no fool, unlike you, Nina Petrovna hissed with such fury that Arina involuntarily backed away from the door. It's almost done. Only her signature was left, and the woman took a step back, feeling the blood drain from her face and her heart thundering so loudly that it seemed as if it should be heard even outside the door. Phrases swirled in my head. The apartment is on it. Everything will fail. Her signature. What did it all mean? Were Vadim and his mother planning something against her? No way. Their family. Yes, they are. The relationship had cooled recently, but to plan something behind her back, the shock and confusion momentarily paralyzed her. But suddenly the voices outside the door stopped and footsteps approached. Arina looked around in panic. There was nowhere to run and it would have been stupid. Acting more on instinct, she quickly backed away from the door, took a deep breath, took a few steps back and pulled out her phone, pretending to go up to the landing and check her message. Just then, the door swung open and Vadim appeared on the threshold. Disheveled, with a flushed face and a strange glint in his eyes. Are you here already? His voice sounded unnatural, with a faint surprise that Arina hadn't noticed in her husband before. She tried to smile, even though her heart was pounding and her throat was dry with excitement. Are you going somewhere? Vadim glanced over his shoulder where his mother-in-law's figure loomed in the dim hallway, then turned back to his wife. His face tightened for a moment, then returned to its usual expressionlessness. Yes, I'm going to the store, he said, obviously trying to sound casual. My mother asked me to pick up some bread. I see, Arina nodded as she walked past her husband into the apartment, trying not to show her excitement. I'm very tired today. I think I'll go to bed early. As she crossed the threshold, she nodded to Nina Petrovna, who stood looking suspiciously at her daughter-in-law. The mother-in-law managed a fake smile that sent a shiver down Arina's spine. Arina, my dear, you look pale, Nina Petrovna said, taking a step toward her. Everything going well at work? Can I make you some tea? No, thank you. Arina tried to keep her voice steady. It's just been a hard day. I want to shower and go to bed. Without looking at anyone else, she went into the bathroom and locked the door behind her. When she was finally alone, she let out a sigh and leaned against the wall, her knees shaking. Her heart was still pounding and her head was a jumble of broken sentences, assumptions and growing panic. Arina turned on the water to drown out her thoughts, and perhaps to quell the anxiety rising from within. Holding her hands under the cold spray, she forced herself to breathe more evenly. Calm down, she told herself. I need to clear my head and think about this. Maybe I misunderstood something. We need proof. My eyes fell on my reflection in the mirror. Dark circles, pale skin, tight lip line. When had she changed so much? When a cheerful, confident woman turned into a hunted, eternally tired creature with an extinct look. Arina remembered what she was like 5 years ago, when she first met Vadim. Strong, ambitious, Confident in her abilities, she worked in a good company, built a career, dreamed of traveling. Vadim came into her life as a breath of fresh air, handsome, attentive, with a brilliant sense of humor. He worked in the marketing department, had a good reputation and prospects for growth. Many office girls were in love with him, but he chose her. Arina. Their romance developed quickly. 6 months later they were already living together, and after another 3 months Vadim asked her to marry him. The first years of their marriage were happy and cloudless. They both worked, saved for a down payment and dreamed of their own apartment. When I finally managed to save up the necessary amount and take out a mortgage on this 2-bedroom apartment in a new neighborhood, life seemed to be a success. But what went wrong? Maybe the first bell rang 3 years ago when Vadim's company was downsized and he was laid off along with half of the department. He couldn't find a job in my field for a long time. I was very worried, even started drinking. In the end he got a job with a demotion in another company, but he didn't stay there long. He left, slamming the door after a conflict with his superiors. Then there were more attempts, but less and less energetic. Gradually, Vadim became more irritable and distant. Arina tried to support him, but often her words of support were perceived as reproaches. The first scandals, insults and innuendos appeared, and 8 months ago Nina Petrovna appeared in their lives, first with short visits, and then with a statement that she had sold her apartment and wanted to help the young people by moving in with them. From that moment on things went downhill even faster. Arina shook her head and came back to reality. The water in the sink continued to run and she just stood there, staring at her reflection, lost in memories. She turned off the tap, dried her hands and took a deep breath. I had to get my thoughts in order, decide what to do next. If what she had overheard was true, and Vadim and his mother really were planning something against her, she needed to be fully prepared. Coming out of the bathroom, Arina went into the kitchen. Nina Petrovna was busy at the stove, pretending to prepare dinner, although it was obvious that she was excited. Her hands were shaking a little, and the oil in the pan was already starting to burn. Something her pedantic mother-in-law had never allowed before. Ninoka Petrovna. Arina turned to her father-in-law and tried to sound normal. I think I'll eat later. I have a headache, so I'm going to lie down for a while. Yes, yes. Of course. My mother-in-law nodded. Too hasty. Have a rest. I'll call you when Vedic comes back. Arina walked slowly into the bedroom and closed the door behind her. Her heart was still pounding and her mind was racing. She sank onto the bed. She tried to gather her thoughts, deciding whether to act now or wait and gather more information. She pulled out her cell phone and quickly dialed a message to her longtime friend Tanya. We really need to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow after work? The reply came almost immediately. Sure. Something happened? Arina did not go into details. I'll tell you when we meet. She put the phone down and went to the closet. If Vadim is really up to something, he might have traces of the recording, documents, something that could clarify the situation. But where to look? In the last few months, he rarely left the house, mostly sitting at the computer, supposedly sending out resumes and studying job openings. A computer? Exactly. But before Marina could decide whether to check her husband's laptop, the front door slammed in the hallway and Vadim returned. She quickly moved away from the closet and lay down on the bed, pretending to be asleep. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened cautiously, and Arina felt her husband's gaze on her. She remained motionless, breathing evenly. After standing for a moment, Vadim closed the door. Lying in the semi-darkness, Arina could feel her fear and anger growing inside her. Was it possible that the man she had lived with for 5 years, trusted and loved, was making plans behind her back? Or maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for the phrase about the plan. Thoughts swirled around in my head, giving you no peace. Somewhere in the back of the apartment, a door slammed, followed by muffled voices. Vadim and his mother were discussing something again, but this time it was much quieter, so Arina could not make out a single word. The knowledge that they might still be plotting against her made her stomach turn cold. She pulled the blanket closer around her, trying not to shiver with fear or resentment. Despite her excitement, fatigue took its toll and Arina fell into the restless sleep. She dreamed that she was running down an endless corridor and that blurry figures were chasing her, trying to take something from her. She woke up several times during the night, startled by every sound, and only in the morning did she fall into a deeper, but still disturbing sleep. In the morning, Arina woke up earlier than usual, even before the alarm. Disturbing thoughts came back as soon as she opened her eyes. Vadim slept next to her, his face turned towards the wall. His breathing was steady and deep. Arina slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to make any noise, and dressed quietly. The apartment was silent. Vadim and his mother-in-law were still asleep. The kitchen clock read 5:30. There was about an hour left before Nina Petrovna usually woke up. Arina moved silently into the living room, where her husband's laptop sat on the desk. She paused for a moment, but she had never looked through it before, and determinedly opened the computer's lid. The screen lit up softly and asked for a password. Arina bit her lip. What password could Vadim use? She tried their wedding date without success. His birthday is over again. Her old address, the name of his dog. After several unsuccessful attempts, she was about to give up when a sudden thought hit her. The mother-in-law's date of birth. Vadim has always been very happy and is attached to his mother, and lately this bond seemed to grow even stronger. My fingers quickly punched in a combination and the screen unlocked. Trying to be methodical, Arina opened the latest documents. Mostly there were resume files, cover letter templates and a presentation. Nothing suspicious. She checked the downloads folder. Nothing special either. Maybe she was paranoid. And the sentence about the plan had an innocent explanation. Almost in desperation, she noticed among the shortcuts on the desktop a folder with the inconspicuous name GNP, the initials of Vadim and his mother. Inside were several files, scans of some documents, an Excel spreadsheet, some photos. Arina clicked on the first one and paused, her breath catching in her throat. It was a draft deed of gift for her share of the apartment. The document stated that she, Arina Viktorovna Samoilova, was transferring her share of the co-ownership to Vadim Nikolaevich Samoilov free of charge. The document was not signed, but everything else was filled in, down to the date and passport number. It can't be, Arina whispered, feeling a wave of nausea rise in her throat and her hands begin to shake. Barely able to contain her panic, she opened the next file, a spreadsheet of calculations. It listed amounts, dates, and some sort of notes. The non-profit paid 500 tons, the realtor paid an advance of 1 ton, and the lawyer paid 30 tons. Among other things, there was a large amount marked new apartment. Down payment. What's that? They plan to buy a new apartment, but why not tell her? The next document was even more shocking, a preliminary contract for the purchase and sale of a 2-room apartment in a new residential complex on the outskirts of the city. The buyers were Vadim Samoilov and Nina Petrovna Samoilova. Arina's name wasn't on the document, and her confusion was replaced by a dizzying rage. So that's it. They're plotting. Get her to sign a deed of gift for her share of her current apartment, and then what? Kick her out or blackmail her? Maybe they want to sell this apartment and buy a new one without her. With trembling fingers, Arina clicked on the next file. There were pictures of the new apartment. Bright, spacious, with a modern renovation and a view of the park. In the to-do list attached to the photos, it was said to remove things from the old KV-12, get money from the buyer 20.12, issue a new dunk. The new year was just over a month away. That is, they planned to complete the entire process before the holidays, and see what they planned to do with it. The last file in the folder contained scans of contracts with a real estate agency and a law firm. Arina skimmed through the documents, noting the key points: preliminary contract for the sale of their current apartment, legal support of the transaction, advice on family property issues. It all looked like Vadim and his mother had been carefully planning a big real estate deal for a long time, and apparently it wasn't part of their plan to let Arina know the details until the very last moment. Hearing a commotion in the next room, Arina hurriedly closed the files and turned off the computer. Her heart was pounding and her mind was full of thoughts. Now she knew what plan her husband and mother-in-law were talking about, but what should she do with this knowledge? Confront them directly or find out more? Before she could make up her mind, she heard footsteps in the hall. Nina Petrovna appeared sleepily in a silk dressing gown, her hair neatly combed, as if she would not allow herself to look untidy even at night. Arina asked her mother-in-law in surprise. "Why are you up so early?" "I don't think it's your shift this morning. I couldn't sleep," Arina replied as casually as possible, trying to keep her voice steady. "I decided to drink coffee before work. Think about some things." Her mother-in-law's gaze became sharp, searching, as if trying to penetrate her daughter-in-law's innermost thoughts. "What things?" Arina waved away the question, trying not to show her excitement. "By the way, Ninoka Petrovna," she deliberately used this nickname, which she usually avoided, "do you know where the documents for our apartment are? I want to check some insurance information." She saw her mother-in-law's face flicker for a moment, but it was a clear reaction to the unexpected question. Nina Petrovna quickly regained her composure, but Arina's attentive gaze did not escape her momentary confusion. "I have no idea," Nina Petrovna replied too quickly. "You and Vadik should know. I am a temporary person here." "Temporary?" Then, Arina repeated, watching her mother-in-law's reaction carefully. She pursed her lips slightly, but said nothing, just turned back to the stove, pretending to be completely absorbed in making tea. There was a tense silence in the kitchen. Nina Petrovna studied the teapot with exaggerated attention, while Arina sipped her cooling coffee slowly, trying not to betray the storm of emotions raging inside her. Finally, unable to bear the oppressive silence, her mother-in-law spoke first. "How's work?" "What is it?" she asked with feigned interest. "Are you still thinking about a promotion?" "Maybe," Arina replied evasively, "but I have other priorities right now." "Like what?" Nina Petrovna pretended to be interested, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Family." "Of course." Arina looked her mother-in-law straight in the eye. "Lately I have the feeling that something is going wrong. It's like a wall has grown between us. Don't you think so?" Nina Petrovna looked away and nervously adjusted the collar of her dressing gown. "I don't know what you mean. As far as I am concerned, everything is as usual. Vadim is a little out of sorts because of the problems at work, but it will pass." "I hope." Arina got up from the table. "Okay, I'm off. I have a lot to do today. In the evening I will probably be late for meetings after work." "Who is the meeting with?" My mother-in-law immediately became suspicious. Arina lied. "At work. We are talking about a new project." As she was getting ready for work, she felt Nina Petrovna's eyes on her. She was watching her every move. as if trying to catch the slightest sign that her sister-in-law knew something. Arina tried to behave as usual, packing her bag, checking her phone, putting on her raincoat, but inside everything was shrinking from the realization that some kind of conspiracy was unfolding against her in her own house. As she left the apartment, she almost ran into a sleepy Vadim, who was just leaving the apartment. His eyes were bleary, his hair disheveled, and there was a pillow mark on his cheek. Such a homely, cozy look from her husband used to make Arina feel emotions. But now, all she felt was disgust. How could a man who schemed behind his wife's back sleep so peacefully? Leaving already? Vadim muttered, pulling himself up. Yes, shortly, Arina replied. She didn't wait for an answer until the evening before she got out and walked quickly to the elevator. It wasn't until she was outside, breathing in the cold November air, that she felt free to breathe. All the way to work she was lost in heavy thoughts. What should I do next? What should I do? Who should I trust? The workday dragged on endlessly. Arina couldn't concentrate on her tasks. Her mind kept returning to the morning opening. During her lunch break, she called the bank where she and Vadim had taken out a mortgage and clarified the details of their loan agreement. As she had suspected, the payments over the past few months had been made exclusively from her account. For about 6 months, Vadim did not participate in the repayment of the loan, although he assured her that he was using the money he needed for this purpose. Allegedly borrowed regularly from friends. Lie after work, Arina met in a small cafe in the camp. Away from home and work, they had known each other since they were students, and if anyone could give good advice in such a situation, it was Tanya, a practical, sensible, but at the same time incredibly loyal friend. Seeing Arina's exhausted face, Tanya was immediately alarmed. "Arin, what happened? You don't have a face. The last time I saw you like this was when your father went into the hospital." Trying to keep her voice calm, Arina told her about the conversation she had overheard and what she had found on her husband's computer. As the story progressed, Tanya's face grew darker and darker, and by the end of the story she could no longer hide her indignation. "You know," she said when Arina had finished, "I always felt there was something wrong with your Vadim. Too smooth, too regular. From the first time I met him, he made me cringe. But you were so in love that you didn't notice anything around you. And when his mother moved in with you, it became clear who was the boss. I was blind," Arina admitted bitterly. "But that's not the point. What should I do, Tanya? I feel like the ground is slipping out from under my feet." "First of all, protect yourself," her friend replied firmly. "You bought the apartment when you got married, so it's community property, no matter who it's deeded to. But if you voluntarily sign the deed of gift, and you could sign it without looking at it." But if Vadim had brought it and said that it was just a formality, Arina would have thought about it maybe sooner. She was used to trusting her husband and signing documents he brought to her without really reading them. But in the last few months, as relations have grown strained, she has become more cautious. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Definitely not now, but a month ago, probably yes." "Especially if he'd made a convincing case." "You see," Tanya nodded. "Legally, it will be difficult to do anything about it if you sign it voluntarily. You'll need a good lawyer, and the sooner the better." "Lawyer?" Arina asked again. "Do you think it's that serious? What do you think?" Tanya leaned forward. "They are preparing documents behind your back. They want to take away your apartment. What could be more serious? I know a lawyer who specializes in family law. I can make an appointment for tomorrow." Arina nodded, feeling both grateful for her friend and bitter at the realization of what the situation had come to. Yesterday she was just a tired, dissatisfied woman, and today she was already discussing lawyers and possible legal consequences with a friend. How quickly things can turn upside down. Also, Tanya continued, don't let on that you know everything. Pretend that nothing has changed. Let them think their plan is working. This will give you time to prepare, secure yourself legally, and maybe learn more about their intentions. This advice seemed reasonable, although it contradicted Arina's first instinct to tell her husband and mother-in-law what she thought of them. But her friend was right. Now was not the time for emotional scenes. You have to act coolly, prudently. You're right, Arina sighed. I'll play their game until I find out what's best. But it's so disgusting. I never thought I'd be forced to pretend in my own home. I know. Tanya squeezed her hand sympathetically. But the most important thing right now is to protect yourself. Honesty, straightforwardness will wait for better times. On her way home that evening, Arina thought about the advice she had given her friend. Maybe Tanya was right and she needed to work through a lawyer, but something inside her resisted that approach. After all, this was her husband, her family. 5 years of marriage can't end like this, dirty and mean. There must be another way out, some explanation. At home, she was greeted by an unusually friendly Vadim. He even kissed her on the cheek, a gesture that had become rare in recent months, and helped her take off her coat. How was your day? He asked with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was fine, Arina replied cautiously. What are you doing? Caring. I just missed you. He smiled, but it was forced. And there is an important conversation to have. Arina's heart skipped a beat. Here it begins. What conversation? She tried to keep her voice light. Let's have dinner and I'll tell you everything. Vadim nodded in the direction of the kitchen, where Nina Petrovna was already bustling about, setting the table with exaggerated enthusiasm. Dinner was strange. My mother-in-law lavished compliments on Strepina's meal, which she had prepared herself. Vadim was unusually talkative, told some stories, jokes about non-existent job interviews. Arina ate in silence, feeling her inattention grow with each passing minute. She caught the quick, searching glances of both her husband and mother-in-law, as if they were assessing her mood, wondering if she was ready for something, anything, they had to offer. Finally, when the meal was over, Vadim cleared his throat and adjusted the collar of his shirt, a gesture Arina knew well. He always did it when he was nervous or about to say something unpleasant. Arina, my mother and I have been thinking. In general, we have a proposal. He licked his lips nervously. Which one? Arina watched his expression carefully. You see, our apartment. It's too small for 3 adults. We all feel that, don't we? So my mother offered to help us buy a bigger house. Arina feigned surprise. And where did Nina Petrovna get the money? Vadim and his mother-in-law exchanged a glance. I sold my apartment, remember? Nina Petrovna interrupted. Her voice was too high, betraying her excitement. I could invest some of the money in your new home. Family, after all. How nice of you, Arina said, feeling her anger boiling inside. And what exactly are you suggesting? Well, we could sell this apartment, add my mother's money and take out a new mortgage for a 3-room apartment. Vadim spoke more confidently, obviously encouraged by the fact that Arina did not immediately reject the idea. But there's a catch. Our current apartment is registered to you, and the bank is reluctant to give mortgages to the unemployed. So it would be easier if you'd registered your share in my name. Purely formal, of course, purely formal, Arina repeated, trying not to show her shock at how easily he lied to her face. Yes. This is just to simplify the procedure, Nina Petrovna answered. Your name will still be on the new documents. Isn't that right, Vedek? Of course, He agreed too quickly. It's just a formality. Arina slowly rose from the table. She was shaking with indignation. I was too, but she tried to control herself. Tanya's advice not to show that she knew everything was echoing in her head. You know what? She said, looking at her husband and mother-in-law. I need to think about this. Still, it is a serious decision. But what's there to think about? Nina Petrovna did not hide her irritation. We care about your future. Our future? Arina let the irony slip into her voice or something. Excuse me, I need some fresh air. Without waiting for an answer, she left the apartment. Vadim hurried after her. Arina, what are you doing? He grabbed her arm. What's bothering you? That's it, Vadim, she's free. Absolutely everything. Outside, Arina took a deep breath of the cold air. The night sky was overcast, and only a few streetlights illuminated the deserted street. She walked quickly, not knowing her way, just to get away from home, from these people who had once been the closest to her, but were now strangers, hostile and dangerous. Now she knew for sure that the conversation she had overheard and the documents she had found were not an accident or a misunderstanding. Her husband and mother-in-law were really planning to take her property. But why? Has Vadim really stopped loving her? Or is it the money? Maybe it's all the influence of my mother-in-law. Arina wandered through the evening streets for a long time, oblivious to the cold. Her head was spinning with fragments of thoughts, memories of the happiest moments of her marriage, the bitterness of knowing the betrayal. When she came home at midnight, the apartment was dark. Vadim pretended to be asleep, but Arina could feel his tension. She lay down on the edge of the bed, as far away from her husband as possible, and closed her eyes, knowing that she was unlikely to fall asleep. The next morning, Arina called work and took the day off, citing poor health. After waiting for Vadim to leave, ostensibly for a job interview, but Arina already doubted that this was true, she began a more thorough investigation. First, she checked their shared mailbox, which she hadn't opened in a long time. All important messages came to her email. Among the pamphlets, she found several letters from the bank addressed to Vadim. Opening one of the envelopes, Arina saw a statement for a new credit account she didn't even know existed. Apparently, Vadim had taken out a large consumer loan a few months ago. Where did that money go? He never mentioned the loan. Then she carefully examined the carpenter's cabinet where she had been sitting. Vadim had a secret compartment for important papers. There she found another unpleasant surprise. A preliminary contract with a real estate agency for the sale of their apartment, signed only by Vadim. The document stated that the sellers were Vadim Nikolaevich and Arina Viktorovna Samoilova. Of course, her signature was not there. So why do they need a gift certificate? Arina muttered. They want to sell the apartment and put me in the way. Continuing her search, she found a pile of documents in her mother-in-law's bedside table, including an official report on the sale of her apartment, dated almost a year earlier. But the most interesting thing was at the bottom of the pile, a copy of the donation for a one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city, where Nina Petrovna was the donor and Vadim was the recipient. The date of the document is 1 month before the mother-in-law moved in with them, supposedly selling her house. Oh my God, Arina whispered, putting the pieces of the puzzle together. They had planned it all from the beginning. The picture became clear. Nina Petrovna did not sell her apartment, but simply gave it to my son. Then she moved in with them, pretending to be a homeless mother who supposedly gave all the money from the sale of the apartment to her children. But in fact, he and Vadim were planning a new scam. Force Arina to transfer her share in her apartment to her husband, then sell that property and use the proceeds, along with the loan Vadim secretly took out, to buy a new apartment just for her and her mother, without Arina. But why? What had she done to deserve such a betrayal? Or was it not her, but their common inability to keep their feelings together? Arina sat down on the bed and felt tears welling up in her eyes. Once this man had been her most beloved, reliable, close. She trusted him implicitly, told him all her secrets, dreams, plans, and all the time he was pretending or really loving. But then something broke. Was it his mother's influence or his own weakness? Unemployment, loss of breadwinner status, wounded male ego. She thought back to their first months together, passionate and full of mutual admiration, how Vadim looked at her with pride when he introduced her to his friends, how they made plans for the future, dreams of children, travel. When all that disappeared, when sincerity was replaced by falsehood, and love by calculation. Perhaps the first cracks appeared 3 years ago, when Vadim was fired. He was very worried then, but Arina supported him as much as she could, both in word and deed. Together they survived the crisis, but even then something subtly changed in their relationship. Vadim became more withdrawn and irritable. His self-esteem was shattered, and nothing seemed to be able to restore it. Then Nina Petrovna appeared. From day one, her mother-in-law seemed determined to drive a wedge between them. Her constant comments that a real man should provide for his family, that in our time husbands did not allow their wives to work so hard, that Vedic deserved more. All this was eating away at their relationship like acid. Lost in thought, Arina did not immediately hear the sound of the door opening. She hastily folded the documents and put them back in their place. Voices rang out in the hall and Vadim and Nina Petrovna returned. Judging by their animated conversation, they were in a good mood. "Are you home?" Vadim asked, surprised to see Arina. "Yes, I took the day off. My head hurts." She tried to keep her voice calm. "How was the interview?" "Normal. They promised to call me back." As always, Arina couldn't resist being sarcastic. Vadim tensed but said nothing. Nina Petrovna gave her daughter-in-law a displeased look and went into the kitchen. Arina and Vadim were left alone in the living room. "Listen," Vadim began, sitting down next to her on the sofa. "You've been thinking about our offer." Arina looked at her husband carefully. She had once loved this man, trusted him and made plans for the future with him. And now he sat next to her and lied coldly to her face. Something finally cracked inside her. "You know, Vadim," she said slowly, "I think we need to have a serious talk about us, about our marriage, about the future." "About what exactly?" There was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "About what is really going on." Arina looked into his eyes. "I know about your mother's apartment that she supposedly sold. I know about the loan you took from me in Tajan. And about the preliminary contract for the sale of our apartment." Vadim's face changed. He turned pale, then red, and opened his mouth to speak. "I tried to say something, but I couldn't." The voice of Nina Petrovna, who, as it turned out, was listening at the door, rang out. "Have you been going through our things?" "Your things?" Arina asked, turning to her mother-in-law. "In my house, which you want to take away from me." "Yes, I searched for the truth and found it." Nina Petrovna burst into the room. Her face was distorted with rage. "You don't understand anything. We are doing this for the good of the family." "For the good of the family," Arina said with a bitter smile. "Or for the good of you and Vadim?" "Tell me honestly, did you plan this from the beginning?" "Yes, from the moment you came to live with us." Her mother-in-law hesitated, but quickly recovered her composure. "What's the difference?" "The main thing is that we have everything covered. And even if you refuse to sign the deed, we'll find a way." "Mom, shut up!" Vadim suddenly shouted, jumping up from the sofa. "What do you mean, shut up? Nina Petrovna turned to her son. She'd ruined everything. Everything we had planned. Do you know what? Arina stood up, suddenly feeling determined. I'm leaving. I can't stay in the same room with people who betrayed me and planned to leave me without a roof over my head. Arina, wait. Vadim took a step towards her. Let's talk quietly. It's not what you think. And how? She paused in the doorway. Enlighten me. Vadim opened his mouth, but no words came out. Nina Petrovna snorted scornfully. Don't humiliate yourself in front of her, son. She wouldn't understand anyway. People like her think only of themselves. About me. Arina felt a wave of anger rise in her. I work 2 jobs to support my family while you two make plans behind my back. How many of us think only of ourselves? Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the apartment. Tears blurred her eyes as she walked down the stairs. Not knowing where to go, she hailed a cab and gave Tanya the address. Her friend welcomed her with open arms and, after listening to her rambling story, immediately offered to stay with her for as long as it takes. She said firmly, "You're not going back to that shithole." "Thank you." Arina squeezed her hand gratefully. "But I have to deal with this situation. I can't just run away and leave everything behind." "Of course," Tanya nodded. "And the first thing you need is a lawyer." "Good." The next day, after another day off, Arina met with a lawyer recommended by Tanya. The lawyer listened carefully to her story, asked a few clarifying questions and shook his head thoughtfully. "The situation is not easy, but it is not hopeless," he said. "First of all, your apartment was bought during the marriage, so it is a jointly acquired property, regardless of who it is registered to. Second, if you didn't sign the deed, there's no problem. Your share remains yours, but the loan your husband took out is more interesting. If it was taken out during the marriage, then it is also a joint debt according to the law. But there are nuances if it can be proved that the funds were not used for the needs of the family." "And how to prove it?" asked Arina. "You have to trace the movement of the money." The lawyer leaned forward. "Where did the loan money go? To which accounts? If it was used to buy real estate, only in the name of the husband or his mother, then there is a chance to challenge the community of interests. And what do you recommend now?" "Collect evidence." The lawyer opened his laptop. "And prepare a divorce." "I'm afraid that's unavoidable in your situation." Divorce. The word echoed in Arina's head as she returned to Tanya. Had it really come to that? 5 years of marriage ending like this? With deception, legal battles, division of property. A surprise awaited her at home. There were several missed calls from Vadim and a voice message on the phone. Arina pressed play with trembling fingers. "Arina. It's me." Vadim's voice was unusually calm. "Please. Let's talk." "I'll explain everything. It's not what you think." "Call me, please." Arina listened to the message several times, trying to figure out if her husband was sincere or if this was just another manipulation. In the end, she decided to call back, not to reconcile, but to find out the whole truth. "Arina," Vadim answered after the first Zagatka, as if he was sitting with the phone in his hands. "Yes. That's me." She tried to keep her voice calm. "You really wanted to talk?" He breathed a sigh of relief. "We can meet again. Just not at home and without my mother." It was an unusual request. Vadim rarely offered anything without his mother's consent, especially lately. Arina agreed to meet at a small cafe near her home. When she arrived, Vadim was already waiting for her, nervously sorting through the bags of sugar. He looked haggard. There were dark circles under his eyes. At the sight of Arina, he jumped to his feet, but immediately sank back down awkwardly. "Thanks for coming," he said as Arina sat down in front of him. "I didn't know if you would come. I want to hear the truth." She looked Vadim straight in the eye. The whole truth. He took a deep breath, as if to gather his strength. "You're right. My mum and I planned what you found, but it wasn't my idea, I swear. My mom started pushing me even before she moved in with us. I told you that you didn't respect me, that I should take control of my finances, my property. So you decided to listen to your mother and cheat on your wife." Arina did not hide her bitterness. "I'm confused." Vadim lowered his eyes. "When I lost my job and you became the sole breadwinner, something broke inside me. I felt like an idiot. And my mother only added fuel to the fire, constantly reminding me that a real man does not behave like that, that in her day, husbands were breadwinners. She said that she would help me get back on my feet, that we would buy a new house. Without me, finished for him. Arina, throw your wife out and live happily ever after." "Well, no. I mean, I don't really know." Vadim looked really confused. "I never thought about the consequences for you. I just did what my mother told me. As always." "As always," Arina echoed. "That's the whole problem." "Yes, it is. You never made your own decisions. Always a mother." Mom, I know," Vadim said suddenly and firmly. "And I want to change that. After you left, Mom and I had a big fight. It was the first time I told her what I thought. She had ruined my marriage, my life. And you know what she said? 'You ruined it yourself. You're a weakling.' You know, my own mother." Arina looked at her husband closely. Maybe for the first time in a long time he spoke honestly without looking at his mother. But did it matter now that the trust was broken? "What do you suggest?" "What is it?" she finally asked. "I do not know," Vadim admitted. "I would like to take it all back. But I understand that this is impossible. I betrayed you, and there's no excuse for that. I just wanted you to know, I am aware of my guilt, and if you decide to file for divorce, I will not resist. And I won't apply for an apartment." This was unexpected. Arina studied her husband's face carefully, trying to find out if he was sincere or if this was just another trick. "What about your mother?" "She'll just give up her plans." Vadim smiled bitterly. "She's furious." "Gathering things, saying he's gone, clinging to his sister, accusing me of treachery, of spinelessness. And do you know the worst part? I've spent my whole life trying to live up to her, to be what she wants, and I still wasn't good enough." Arina felt a sudden pang of pity. Yes, Vadim had betrayed her, planned to take her property, but perhaps he was also a victim of his mother, of his weakness, of his inability to resist manipulation. "What do we do next?" she asked quietly. "That's up to you." Vadim looked up at her. "I will understand whatever decision you make." Arina was silent for a long time, pondering the situation. Part of her wanted to file for divorce right away and forget this nightmare like a bad dream. Another part of her remembered the good moments of their marriage, the years when they were happy. Can a person change? Can they break free from the influence of a toxic parent and start an independent life? "You know," she finally said, "I can't make up my mind right now. I need time and space. I'll stay with Tanya for now." "Of course," Vadim quickly agreed. "I understand. And thank you for listening." When they said goodbye at the exit of the cafe, Vadim hesitantly held out his hand. Arina hesitated, but shook it anyway. There was no forgiveness in the gesture, just an acknowledgement that their conversation had taken place. Arina spent the next days thinking. She met with a lawyer, gathered documents for possible divorce proceedings, but had not yet made a final decision. Vadim occasionally wrote inconspicuous messages, simply saying that his mother had indeed moved out and that he was actively looking for a job. Once he wrote that he had found a temporary part-time job as a courier, with no prestige but at least some income. Arina watched his actions closely to see if the change was real or just an attempt to regain her trust. A week after their conversation in the cafe, she decided to go home to pick up some things. Vadim warned me that he would be at work. I left the keys with the concierge. Entering the apartment, Arina was startled. Usually, the cluttered place was neatly cleaned, things were put in their places. There was a vase of her favorite flowers on the kitchen table. But Vadim remembered her preferences. As she packed her things in the bedroom, she noticed her wedding photo on the nightstand. It had been in the living room, but had disappeared. And next to the photo was a small note, "I'm sorry, I'll fix it." These details made Arina think. Perhaps Vadim was really trying to change. Maybe leaving his mother was a release, a chance to be himself. While she was thinking, the doorbell rang. When Arina opened it, she was surprised to see Nina Petrovna standing on the threshold. Her mother-in-law looked as trim as ever, with a perfect hairdo, but her expression was unusual. Not the usual arrogance, but a strange mixture of determination and uncertainty. "May I come in?" "What is it?" she asked without waiting for an invitation. Arina silently stepped aside to let her mother-in-law pass. She went into the kitchen and sat down at the table, placing a folder in front of her. "I've come to talk," Nina Petrovna began, avoiding his direct gaze. "Vadim said he told you all about our plan." "Yes," Arina confirmed, sitting down across from him. "He was quite frank." "So what have you decided?" "Divorce." "I haven't decided yet," Arina answered honestly. "Why are you interested in that? Didn't you want to ruin our marriage?" To her surprise, Nina Petrovna did not lose her temper, but only sighed heavily. "I never wanted to ruin your marriage. I wanted something else." "And what is that?" "Take my apartment and throw me out on the street." "No." Her mother-in-law looked up. "I wanted my son to be strong, independent, not dependent on a woman. I raised him alone. You know, his father left when Vadim was 5. I just packed my things and left. I swore that my son would never be the same weakling, that he would be a real man, the master of his house. And to do that, he had to deceive his wife." Arina didn't hide her sarcasm. "I don't really know." Nina Petrovna suddenly collapsed. "When Vadim lost his job, and then again and again I saw how he broke down, how he became dependent on you. And it seemed to me that if I helped him take control of his assets, his finances, he would feel like a man again. I didn't think about you, to be honest." This confession was so unexpected that Arina did not immediately find an answer. "Meanwhile," my mother-in-law continued, "when Vadim threw me out after your fight, I was angry, but then I began to think, it was the first time in his life that he had turned against me, the first time that he had put you before his mother. And you know what? I felt something like pride. My son is finally a man. Just not in the way I had planned." Nina Petrovna opened the folder she had brought. Inside were documents, a donation for a one-room apartment with her name on it, a contract with a real estate agency, and some other papers. "I cancelled the donation for Vadim's apartment," she said, tapping her finger on the first document. "It's registered to me again." And this is what she pointed out on the next page, "A waiver of any claim to your apartment. I signed it today at the notary." Arina looked at her mother-in-law in disbelief. "This is another manipulation or sincere repentance?" "Why are you doing this?" "What is it?" she asked bluntly. Nina Petrovna thought for a moment, choosing her words. "I spent my whole life trying to make my son strong, but in reality I made him weak, dependent on me. It wasn't until he chose you that I realized he had finally grown up." "I'm not saying I approve of your marriage. I still think you're too independent for him. But I won't interfere anymore. This is your life. Arina silently studied the documents. They looked authentic, stamped and signed. Is Nina Petrovna really withdrawing? And what now? What now? She asked, looking up at her mother-in-law. You're just going to disappear from our lives. Not quite. Nina Petrovna smiled faintly. I'm still his mother, but I'll keep my distance, and I'd like you to give him another chance. He really loves you. You know, he's just as confused as I am. My mother-in-law stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. She turned at the door. He got a job as a courier. My son is a courier. Before, I would have been ashamed of it. But now, for some reason, I'm proud of it. Strange, huh? After Nina Petrovna left, Arina sat on the sofa in the kitchen for a long time, sorting through documents and thinking. The story took an unexpected turn. First, Vadim admitted his guilt and began to change. Now my mother-in-law admitted that she was wrong. Could Arina trust her again? Was it worth giving this marriage another chance? She didn't notice the passage of time and winced. Vadim returned when he heard the front door open. When he saw his wife in the kitchen, he froze in the doorway. Arina, are you back? Not yet. She pointed to the bag of things. I just came by to pick something up and talk to you. Sure. Vadim carefully sat down on the chair opposite. I'm listening to you. Your mother came by today. Arina handed him the documents and brought this. Vadim scanned the papers and raised his eyebrows in surprise. Did she really do it? I do not believe it. I can hardly believe it either, Arina confessed. But the documents are real. They sat in silence, not knowing what to say next. Finally, Vadim plucked up courage. Arina, I know that I have done many irreparable things. I betrayed your trust. I almost robbed you of your home. I don't deserve forgiveness, but if you give me another chance, I swear I'll do everything to redeem myself. I've already found a job. Yes, it's just a courier. But it is a start. I will work. I'll pay my share of the mortgage. I'll wait. Arina raised her hand to stop him. I do not know if I can trust you again. What you did wasn't just a mistake. It was treason. I know. He lowered his head. And I'll understand if you decide to leave. But I want you to know that I do love you. I always have. I just let my complexes, my weakness, my mother's influence get the better of me. And I will always regret it. Arina looked at her husband, who was drooping, remorseful, but still trying to correct the situation. Part of her wanted to forgive him, to give him another chance. The other part reminded her of the betrayal, the lie. How close he'd come to ruining her life. I need time, she finally said. I can't make a decision right now. Of course, Vadim quickly agreed. I'll wait as long as you need. Arina gathered her things and headed for the exit. At the door she turned around. And Vadim, I'm glad that you found a job. This is a good sign. He smiled back weakly. The following weeks were a time of reflection and reassessment. Arina continued to live with Tanya, but communicated regularly with Vadim, first by phone, then meeting in a cafe. He really changed, not only working as a courier, but also finding a part-time job at a call center in the evenings. For the first time in a long time, he made his own mortgage payments. Even began to pay off the loan debt he had previously hidden. Nina Petrovna kept her word and stayed away. She moved back to her apartment and called Vadim only occasionally, without interfering in his decisions. Gradually, Arina began to see in her husband the former Vadim with whom she had once fallen in love. Without the poisonous influence of his mother, without pressure and the manipulation, he seemed to straighten his shoulders, to become more self-confident. Of course, it was impossible to fully restore trust. Too much had been said and done, but perhaps they could start over. building a new relationship on the ruins of an old one. One evening, after a particularly pleasant meeting, Vadim accompanied Arina to Tanya's house. At the door, he suddenly took her hand. "Arina, I've thought a lot and I've understood that I can't live in limbo anymore. I need to know if we have a chance or if I have to let you go and move on." She looked at him carefully. Over the past few weeks, she had spent a lot of time thinking about their marriage, what had gone wrong and whether it could be fixed, and she had come to a conclusion. "You know, Vadim," she began slowly, "when I found out about your plan with your mother, my world collapsed. I thought I could never forgive you, that our marriage was hopelessly ruined. But then I saw how you changed, how you fought for us, for yourself. And I realized something important," that he was holding his breath. "I realized that I love you," Arina said simply. "Despite everything that happened, I'm willing to give us another chance. But not like before. We have to change everything. How we communicate, how we make decisions, how we make plans. And no more secrets, no more lies." Vadim's face reflected a whole range of emotions, from disbelief to joy, from relief to fear. "Are you really ready to return?" "Yes." Arina pressed his hand lightly, "but not right away. Let's do it gradually. I can come on weekends, then a few days a week, and then we'll see." "Of course. Tell me." He nodded, not hiding his happy smile. "I'll do my best not to disappoint you again, I swear." They stood at the entrance, holding hands as they had at the beginning of their relationship. They had a long way to go to rebuild trust and healthy relationships. But now they had a chance to start over, knowing where the dangers lay. As she walked up to Tanya's apartment, Arina thought about how sometimes you have to go through pain and betrayal to truly understand what you value. Her marriage was on the brink of collapse, but perhaps this particular ordeal would make it stronger. She didn't know what to expect. "But I was willing to take the risk. After all, sometimes you have to give a second chance not just to another person, but to yourself. A chance for happiness, for love, for a full life." A few months later, standing at the window of their apartment, Arina watched Vadim return from work, no longer as a courier, but as a manager in a small company where he had been hired after a probationary period. He walked with a confident stride, not at all like the broken man he had been recently. When he saw his wife standing in the window, he waved and smiled openly and sincerely. Her mother-in-law kept her promise and did not interfere in their lives, although they sometimes met on Arina's initiative. Little by little, their relationship changed as well, becoming more respectful, though not close. But that was okay. Not all family relationships have to be perfect. As Arina watched her husband approaching, she thought about how close they had been to falling apart, how easily they could have lost everything because of deception and mistrust. But fate gave them another chance, and they did not waste it. Arina's choice was what she called this chapter of her life. The choice to forgive, but not to forget. The choice to fight instead of giving up. The choice to believe in the best, even when everything seemed hopeless. And now, as Vadim entered the apartment and hugged her, she knew she had made the right choice. But life does not stand still and challenges do not end with the first victory. The very next day, Arina received a strange phone call from the bank. The employee asked if she really wanted to close her joint account with her husband and give up ownership of the apartment. "Excuse me, what are you talking about?" Arina felt a shiver run down her spine. "I hadn't planned anything like this." "Strange," said the girl on the other end of the line. "Your husband came to us today with a notarized power of attorney from you. He claimed that you wanted to give up your share in the mortgage apartment and close the joint bank account." Arina didn't finish listening. My ears were ringing and I felt sick. Only yesterday he and Vadim had agreed to start all over again. Only yesterday she had believed that he had really changed, that trust was possible between them. And here it was. Was it all a lie? Another clever plan to throw her off her guard. I'm afraid there was a mistake. Arina tried to keep her voice calm, even though her stomach was seething with anger and pain. I didn't give you a power of attorney. Please don't spend it. There will be no transactions on our accounts and property without my personal presence. Of course, the bank teller also seemed alarmed. In this case, I should inform you that your signature and documents aroused our suspicions, so we decided to call you back directly. You should contact the police. After the call ended, Arina sat motionless for a long time, clutching the phone in her hand. Did Vadim decide to go to the bank? Or is this some kind of mistake? Maybe his mother-in-law had put him up to it again. But Nina Petrovna seemed resigned and withdrew. Tanya's kitchen clock ticked away the seconds, and Arina couldn't gather her thoughts. Her mind refused to accept the obvious. All these weeks, all these meetings, conversations, confessions. Was it all part of some elaborate plan? She remembered Vadim's sincere joy last night when she agreed to give their marriage another chance. That joy could not be faked. Or could it? Arin, why are you so pale? Tanya, who had just returned from work, came into the kitchen. Arina silently handed her the phone, which still showed the number of the bank. After briefly recounting the conversation, she looked up at her friend with a lost expression. I do not know what to think. Tanya, if this is Vadim, then everything was a lie from the beginning. But I saw his eyes, his joy. It couldn't be a lie. Tanya sat down next to him and considered the situation. What if it isn't Vadim? I assumed, she asked. What if it's someone else using their data or documents? Who? Arina smiled bitterly. Mother-in-law, I wouldn't be surprised. But what's the point? She has already retired, even issued the documents. I don't know, Tanya said, shaking her head. But before you draw any conclusions, you need to talk to Vadim directly. Arina nodded, her stomach clenching at the thought of this conversation. If Vadim betrayed her again, that would be the end of it. No more chances. No more excuses. But if not, if this was some kind of mistake or deception by a third party, then what? Will they be able to survive another blow like this? Will they be able to rebuild the trust that has just begun to revive? The phone rang in the apartment. Arina looked at Vadim's screen. Something snapped in her chest. She took a deep breath, tried to calm herself and accepted the challenge. Hello. Her voice was strained. Arina. Vadim's voice was excited, with a hint of panic. I just got a call from the bank. Someone tried to close our account in your name. Arina froze, not knowing what to say. Her husband sounded genuinely alarmed, and in his voice he said, I don't know. There was no hint of deception. Do you know who it could have been? What? She asked cautiously. I have no idea. Vadim sounded genuinely indignant. Some man who presented a power of attorney from you. They called me for confirmation because the signature seemed suspicious to them. Arina, what's going on? Are you all right? Where are you now? Arina heard a real alarm in the stream of excited questions. Not about property. Not about money, but about her. It couldn't be an illusion. She took a deep breath and felt the tension ease a little. I'm at Tanya's, she replied. I got a call from the bank too. I thought it was you. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Did you think I was trying to trick you again? Vadim's voice dropped to a whisper after all that had happened. Sorry. Arina felt a pang of guilt. It was just so strange. Who else would know about our finances, about our apartment? I don't know. Vadim sighed. But I'll find out. Someone is clearly trying to get us to fight or cheat with our documents. Can I come to you now? Arina hesitated for a moment, despite her relief that Vadim seemed to have nothing to do with this strange story. The mistrust that had grown over the past weeks was not so easy to shake. Let's meet at the same cafe as usual, she suggested. An hour later, the cafe was half empty. On a weekday, few people came here to sit down. Arina chose a table in the corner, away from the few customers. Before she could take a sip of her coffee, the door opened and Odin came in, looking worried. His cheeks flushed from the wind, as if he'd walked all the way here. I've already been to the bank, he said as soon as he sat down across from her. I asked for the surveillance tapes. They promised to give it to the police if we file the report. Arina nodded and looked down into her cup. Relief and shame warred inside her. Relief that Vadim seemed to be telling the truth, and shame that she doubted him again. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I immediately thought of you. It's not fair. Vadim reached across the table and touched her fingers gently. After all I've done, your suspicions are understandable. But I swear, Arina, I'll never do it again. He didn't finish, but a soft voice interrupted him. They both turned their heads at the same time. Nina Petrovna was standing next to the table in an elegant dark coat, with a severe hairstyle and an impenetrable expression on her face. May I join you? She didn't wait for an answer, but sat down at an empty table. Arina and Vadim exchanged puzzled looks. Since that memorable conversation, their mother-in-law had indeed stayed away, and her sudden appearance in the cafe seemed more than a little strange. Mom, what are you doing here? Vadim frowned. I came to warn you. Nina Petrovna spoke quietly but firmly. I have reason to believe that you are both in danger. Arina looked at her mother-in-law incredulously, expecting a trick, but Nina Petrovna's expression was serious, without a hint of her usual arrogance or manipulation. Verpasnosti. What are you talking about? Vadim asked. Her mother-in-law looked around as if to make sure no one was listening, then leaned forward. I think it's Oleg, she whispered. Your cousin. Oleg. Vadim looked confused, but I hadn't spoken to him in 10 years, not since he went abroad. What does he have to do with this? He returned 3 months ago. Nina Petrovna shook her head, and it seems that he has serious problems, debts, maybe even a crime. He came to me about 2 weeks ago and asked for money, but I refused. He was very aggressive, threatening, saying that he would find a way to get what he needed. Arina listened carefully, trying to figure out if this was true or just another clever manipulation of her mother-in-law. But the story was too concrete, too realistic, to be made up. And you think he might have something? Get a power of attorney from me. For what? What is it? She asked. Money, Nina Petrovna replied simply. You have a joint bank account. You have an apartment. If he had managed to close the account, allegedly on your orders, he could have received cash. And if it was possible to issue a waiver of the share, to make a quick sale of the apartment through front persons, it sounded so wild that Arina could hardly believe it. Nevertheless, the explanation was logical. But no matter how he got our documents, information about bills, about the apartment, Vadim looked no less skeptical. He could have hacked your emails or found your documents in your apartment. Her mother-in-law shrugged. I don't know, but I remember him forging signatures at school when he was a kid. He had a real talent. Arina and Vadim exchanged glances with modern technology. The story sounded too fantastic, but it also explained the strange incident at the bank. If you're right, we have to go to the police, Vadim said flatly. This is a scam. Yes, but be careful. Nina Petrovna looked very worried. Oleg was always unstable. And now, if he is really in trouble. She didn't finish, but there was real concern in her voice. Arina was surprised at herself, but for the first time she felt something like solidarity with her mother-in-law. "Thank you for warning us," she said, and the words didn't come easily. "We will be careful." Nina Petrovna nodded and got up from the table. "I'm going. But if I find out anything else, I'll let you know right away." She hesitated, as if to say something else, then changed her mind and left the cafe. Arina and Vadim were left alone to digest what they had heard. "Do you believe her?" Arina asked after a long silence, and Vadim rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I don't know, but the story about Oleg is close to the truth. He really has always been problematic. And for the last few years, as far as I know, I have been living somewhere in Europe, practically without any contact with my family. But why should my mother-in-law warn us?" After all that had happened, Arina still couldn't shake her suspicions. Maybe she really had changed. Vadim shrugged, or maybe he was just afraid for himself. If Oleg is really dangerous and desperate, he can get to her. Arina thought about it. This story really explained the strange incident at the bank. Still, something nagged at her, a detail that didn't fit into the overall picture. "We have to check this information," she decided. "Before we go to the police, let's make sure that Oleg has really returned to the country and that he has a motive for such actions." "I agree," Vadim nodded. "And Arina, thank you for not shutting down right away, for listening to me." She smiled faintly. Trust was slowly restored, but they were taking steps in the right direction. The next few days were filled with intense anticipation. Vadim tried to find information about his cousin, searched social networks, called distant relatives. Meanwhile, Arina informed the bank and the notary about possible fraud and asked them to be extra vigilant about any transactions involving their accounts and property. But life did not stop. Arina continued to work. Vadim went to his new job, and gradually their relationship became more trusting, more stable. Sometimes they met in a cafe after work, sometimes Arina spent the night in their apartment. Slowly, step by step, they rebuilt what had been destroyed. Still, Arina couldn't shake a vague uneasiness. The story about Oleg seemed plausible, but something nagged at her. Maybe it was the way Nina Petrovna described it, too smooth, too convincing, or the fact that no trace of Oleg had been found. All the relatives interviewed claimed not to have seen him for many years. On Thursday night, when Arina spent the night at their home, her anxiety reached a peak. Vadim Krepkoy was sleeping next to her, and she was tossing and turning. "I can't close my eyes." Snippets of conversation swirled in my head, strange coincidences, little details that refused to add up to a single picture. Carefully getting out of bed so as not to wake her husband, Arina went to the kitchen and turned on the kettle. Outside, the early winter morning was already dawning, turning the sky a pale pink. Wrapped in a blanket, she sat down at the table and tried to sort out all the facts in her head. The phone rang and Arina was startled. Who would call so early? An unknown number appeared on the screen. After hesitating for a second, she answered. "Hello." Her voice sounded cautious. Arina heard a man's voice, vaguely familiar, but she couldn't remember where she had heard it. "This is Sergei, Vadim's father. I'm sorry to call you, but it's urgent." Arina stiffened. She'd seen her father-in-law only a few times in all the years they'd been married. He was long divorced from Nina Petrovna and lived in another city. Vadim kept in touch with him, but not too actively. "Of course, Sergei Ivanovich, what happened?" she asked, feeling a growing sense of unease inside her. "I am just passing through town for a few hours right now." Testi's voice was excited. "I really need to talk to you and Vadim. We can drive to your place right now." It was strange, very strange, but maybe Sergei Ivanovich had some important information about Oleg or about the situation with the forged documents. "Yes, of course," Arina replied after a brief moment of confusion. "We're home." Arrived. After finishing the call, she hurried to the bedroom to wake Vadim. The one with Prasnai did not immediately understand what was happening, and when he did, he was as surprised as Arina. He rubbed his eyes. Strangely, he hadn't said anything about coming. "Perhaps something urgent," Arina suggested. He sounded worried. Vadim nodded and got up from the bed. "We'll find out soon enough." They quickly cleaned up and made coffee. I didn't have to wait long. Half an hour later the doorbell rang. Vadim hurried to answer it. On the threshold stood a tall man, very similar to Vadim, but 30 years older. The same eyes, the same features, only sharper, with deep wrinkles and gray hair. Father Vadim looked surprised. "And really here? What's going on?" Sergei Ivanovich entered the apartment quickly, looking around as if he expected to see something unusual. "Vadim, Arina," he nodded to both of them. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I should have warned you personally." "Warn me about what?" Arina asked, feeling her stomach tighten. The man entered the kitchen and sat down heavily on the table. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Nina is playing a new game," he said without further ado. "And this time she might go too far." Vadim and Arina exchanged confused looks. "What are you talking about, Papa?" Vadim sat down across from his father. "My mother stepped back. She even helped us by warning us about Oleg." "Oleg?" Sergei Ivanovich frowned. "Your cousin." "What does he have to do with this?" Arina felt a shiver run down her spine. Nina Petrovna said that he had returned to the country, that he was in trouble, and that it was he who was trying to gain access to our accounts. His father-in-law shook his head, and there was something close to pity in his eyes. "Oleg died 3 years ago. Heart attack in Barcelona. I was at the funeral. A dead woman was hanging in the kitchen." Silence. Arina and Vadim stared at Sergei Ivanovich, unable to comprehend what they had just heard. "But then who?" Vadim began and stopped, suddenly realizing, "No, it can't be." "She wouldn't." "I would," Sergei Ivanovich replied harshly. "Your mother can do a lot when it comes to money or control. I heard about your problems from mutual friends and decided to intervene." She made up the story about Oleg to divert suspicion from herself and perhaps to make you trust her more because she supposedly came to warn you, to help you. Arina closed her eyes and felt a wave of bitterness and frustration rise inside her. She wanted so much to believe that Nina Petrovna had really changed, that the story about the forged documents was just a misunderstanding. But why? Vadim's voice trembled with indignation. She, too, retreated, admitted that she had been mistaken, even issued documents refusing to claim the apartment. "Documents that can be challenged," Sergei Ivanovich noted gloomily. "She also took out a life insurance policy for a large sum, naming you as the beneficiary. Guess what happens if something happens to you? And she has a power of attorney from Arina to the property manager." Arina felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. The picture began to take shape, and it was frightening. Not only was Nina Petrovna not backing down, she was planning something even more sophisticated and dangerous. "But how do you know why you decided to come now?" Vadim asked, still not wanting to believe what he was hearing. Sergei Ivanovich took an envelope from his pocket and put it on the table. "A letter from a friend, a former colleague of mine. Nina had inadvertently let it slip that all the problems would soon be solved, that she had a plan. Given your complicated history, it wasn't finished, but it was clear enough." Arina automatically took the envelope, but didn't open it. She didn't need any more proof. The last pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The strange phone call from the bank, the sudden appearance of her mother-in-law in a cafe, the story of the dead Oleg. It was all part of a new, more complex and dangerous plan. "What should we do?" "What is it?" she asked quietly, looking at Testa. "First of all, collect all the documents, all the evidence of fraud," Sergei Ivanovich replied firmly, "and contact the police." "I'll help you. I have friends in law enforcement, but above all, be careful. Nina can be unpredictable when she feels she's losing." Vadim looked stunned. His world was falling apart for the second time, and once again it was his own mother's fault. Arina shook his hand, feeling their roles suddenly reversed. Now she was strong and supportive, and he was confused and in need of protection. "We'll make it," she said, holding him tightly. Vadim looked at her with both gratitude and despair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have understood. I should have seen. It's not your fault." Arina shook her head. "She's your mother. We all want to believe the best in our parents." Sergei Ivanovich looked at her with some surprise, as if he hadn't expected to see such solidarity after all that had happened. There was something of envy in his eyes, perhaps of the bond that still existed between his son and daughter-in-law despite all the trials. "I'm going to stay in town for a few days," he said, getting up. "I'll help you deal with this situation. Right now, I think you need some time to think about all this. I am staying at the Metropole Hotel. Call me anytime." As the door closed behind her father-in-law, Arina and Vadim sat in silence for a long time, each lost in his own thoughts. Finally, Vadim looked up. There were tears in his eyes. "I don't know if I have the right to ask you to stay after all this," he said quietly. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens next, I'm on your side. Even if it means going against your mother." Arina looked at her husband and saw in him not the weak, mother-dependent person he had been until recently, but a man making a difficult but right decision. Perhaps all these trials were necessary for him to finally grow up, to become independent. "I'm staying," she said simply. "We'll figure it out together." The following days were filled with legal consultations, document collection, and visits to the police. It turned out that Nina Petrovna had indeed tried to get a power of attorney from Arina. Experts confirmed that the signature was forged, but that was only the beginning of the investigation. What else was my mother-in-law up to? How far was she prepared to go? These questions remain unanswered. Nina Petrovna seemed to have disappeared, did not answer the phone, did not open the door to her apartment. Vadim was worried. After all, she was still his mother. But Arina and Sergei Ivanovich persuaded him not to contact her until the situation was clarified. In one of the sleepless nights, when she and Vadim lay awake staring at the ceiling, Arina decided to ask a question that had been bothering her for a long time. Did she really think she could? She hesitated, not daring to say it out loud. She might be planning something really dangerous. Vadim was silent for a long time, and in the darkness Arina couldn't see his expression. Finally he took a deep breath. "I don't know. Before I would have said no, never. But now I just don't know." She was always obsessed with control, always knew best what to do. But to do real damage, I want to believe that she wasn't capable of that. Arina understood him. No matter how terrible his mother-in-law was, Vadim could not simply erase all those years when she had been everything to him. A mother, a father, and a protector. And yet the facts spoke for themselves. Nina Petrovna didn't just manipulate and deceive them. She tried to commit a serious fraud by forging documents. "Let's talk about it tomorrow," Arina said, feeling her fatigue finally take its toll. But in the morning, when a phone call woke her at 6 a.m., it became clear that wisdom would take much more than they thought. It was Sergei Ivanovich, and he sounded agitated. Nina was taken to the hospital. Overdose of sleeping pills. She's in intensive care. Her condition is critical. Vadim, hearing this news, turned pale. Without a word, he began to dress feverishly. Arina, feeling strangely detached, as if watching from the sidelines, called a taxi to the hospital. They were silent on the way, each lost in thought. Arina felt mixed feelings of compassion for her mother-in-law, who might have decided to take a desperate step, fear for Vadim, who looked completely crushed, and what a sin to hide mistrust. What if this is another manipulation, another attempt to evoke pity, to regain control? On sick leave in the corridor, they were met by Sergei Ivanovich, looking haggard and red-eyed from lack of sleep. A uniformed policeman stood beside him, making notes on a pad. "What happened? How is she?" Vadim ran to his father and grabbed his shoulders. "So far, no changes," Sergei Ivanovich replied quietly. "But the doctors say there are chances." Her neighbor Nina found her, asked her to come back in the morning, said she was not feeling well. "Did she say anything?" OST's note pitchfork. Vadim looked lost, as if he didn't understand what was happening. Sergei Ivanovich and the policeman exchanged glances. "Yes," my father-in-law finally said. "There was a note and something else." Vadim, Arina, it seems that your suspicions have been confirmed, and it's much more serious than we thought. He nodded to the policeman, who took out a piece of paper in a transparent evidence bag. It was a letter written in Nina Petrovna's neat handwriting. Arina and Vadim bent over it and began to read. "Son, I'm sorry. I couldn't live with the thought that I ruined your life. Everything I did was out of love for you. But I went too far. I didn't want to hurt you or Arina. I just wanted you to be happy, to have everything you deserve. I got confused and lost myself in trying to control your life. When you chose her over me, I felt like I was losing you forever, and it broke my heart. I know there's no excuse for what I did. The story about Oleg was a lie. I wanted to regain your trust, to be a part of your life again. I can't even write down what I planned. It's too horrible. In the safe in my apartment you will find documents, all my plans, notes, evidence. Give them to the police. Let them know that you and Arina had nothing to do with it. I don't apologize. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I've always loved you, even when I did terrible things." Mum. Arina finished reading the letter, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions rise within her. Compassion for the woman who was so obsessed with controlling her son that she lost her mind. Relief that the truth had finally come out, and a strange sense of respect. Nina Petrovna found the strength to admit her guilt and take responsibility for herself, even in such a terrible way. Vadim sat with his face buried in his hands. His shoulders trembled. Arina put her hand gently on his back, feeling his ribs shake with sobs under her palm. What was she planning? "What is it?" he finally asked in a choked voice. The policeman who had been silent cleared his throat. "We've already checked the safe in your apartment. There were plans and drawings of your apartment with notes on the location of gas lines, a schedule of your movements, a prescription for a strong sleeping pill in Arina's name, which we found out was fake, and instructions for setting up gas appliances." Arina felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Did Nina Petrovna really plan this? "We think so." She wanted to fake accidents, the policeman continued, looking at her sympathetically. "According to the documents, the plan was as follows: to put you both to sleep with sleeping pills and then create a gas leak. In the event of your death, she, as next of kin, would have inherited all the property." Vadim sat motionless, as if petrified. Arina felt goosebumps running down her spine as she realized how close they were to tragedy. If not for that strange call from the bank, if not for the intervention of Sergei Ivanovich, what would happen to her now? Vadim asked without looking up. If she survives the trial, the policeman replied, but given her age and state of health, it'll probably be compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. Arina squeezed her husband's hand tighter, feeling tears running down her cheeks. Not for myself, but for him, for this man who had just lost his mother in the worst possible way, after finding out what she was planning to do. Kill him. Can we see them? Asked Vadim quietly. Not yet. Sergei Ivanovich shook his head. She's unconscious. The doctors are doing their best. They spent the whole day in the hospital, sitting in silence in the corridor, each lost in his own thoughts. In the evening, the doctor appeared, a tired middle-aged man with kind eyes, and reported that Nina Petrovna was out of critical condition, but still very weak. She asked about you, he said, looking at Vadim. Would you like to visit her? Just for a little while. Vadim stood and turned to Karina with a silent question in his eyes. Shesh nodded and followed him up the stairs. The ACU was filled with the hum of machines and the constant beeping of monitors. Nina Petrovna lay on a high hospital bed, tangled in tubes and wires. No makeup, her grey hair disheveled. She looked much older than her years and surprisingly defenseless. When she saw them, she tried to push herself up, but she didn't have the strength. Her eyes were filled with horror, shame, and a kind of doomed determination. Vedic, Arina, the voice was weak, hoarse. Are you here? Vadim approached the bed, but stopped a few steps away, as if hesitating to come closer. Mom, he said quietly. What for? Why? Nina Petrovna closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't know, she whispered. I lost myself. When your father left, you became everything to me. I lived only for you, through you. And when you began to move away, I was afraid. I was afraid of being left alone, not needed by anyone. But plan ahead. Murder. Vadim shook his head. This is crazy. I know, Nina Petrovna replied quietly. When I realized what I was going to do, it turned into a monster. I couldn't live with it. She turned her head to Karina and there was an unusual softness in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said. From day one, I saw you as a rival, someone who would take my son from me. I've been unfair to you. I'm glad you're here for him. He's become stronger with you. Arina didn't know what to say. This confession was so unexpected, so sincere, that the words caught in her throat. She just nodded and felt the tears running down her cheeks again. What will happen now? Vadim asked, taking a step towards the bed. Nina Petrovna smiled weakly. I've already made up my mind. When I'm released, I will go to the clinic voluntarily. I need help. I understand that now, and maybe one day. Can you forgive me? There was none of the usual manipulation or pretense in her voice, just tired hope and genuine remorse. Vadim slowly approached the bed and gently took his mother's hand. I need time, he said softly, but I'll come visit you. You're still my mother. Nina Petrovna's eyes flashed with surprise, then with gratitude. She shook her son's hand and then looked at Arina. Take care of him, she whispered. Arina nodded, not trusting her voice. Nina Petrovna leaned back on her pillow, clearly exhausted from this brief conversation. A nurse appeared in the doorway and motioned for them to leave. After leaving the room, Vadim leaned against the wall as if his legs refused to support him. Arina hugged him, feeling him shake. Are you okay? What is it? She asked quietly. No, he said honestly. But I will. We will be. As they left the hospital late that night, they walked in silence, holding hands. Outside, fluffy snow was falling, covering the city in a white blanket. as if erasing all traces of the past, giving it a chance to start over with a clean slate. "You know," Vadim said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the snow-covered parade square, "the hospital makes me feel free for the first time in a long time. It's as if some invisible chain that has always been on me has finally been broken." Arina nodded in understanding. She could see the change in him, in the way he held his shoulders, the way he looked straight ahead without hiding his eyes. This was the new Vadim, not the weak-willed, mother-dependent man who had allowed himself to be dragged into an adventure against his own wife. This was a mature man, capable of making difficult decisions and taking responsibility for his life. "What do we do next?" she asked, looking at the falling snow. "Live," Vadim replied simply. "Day by day, together, if you still want to be with me." Arina looked at him. The man she had once loved, lost, and found again after so many trials. Maybe it wasn't all in vain. Maybe they had to go through this storm to find their true selves. "I do," she said, squeezing his hand tighter. "But let's start over. Without the shadow of the past, without suspicion, without innuendo." Vadim nodded, and for the first time in a long time, the same sparkle appeared in his eyes that had once won over Arina, sparks of hope, confidence, inner strength. "Let's start again," he repeated. And these words sounded like promises. The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks in the hospital square, giving them a sense of cleanliness and newness. Arina looked to the future without fear, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and more determined. The choice was not made out of duty or pity, but out of a deep love that withstood all storms. Arina's choice, as she called it, is this chapter of her life. The choice to believe in a person, even when everything is against her. The choice to fight for what is precious, even when it would be easier to give up. The choice to start Chakala when it seemed all was lost. And that choice, she realized now, had made her not weaker, but stronger, not more naive, but wiser. Love is not always easy or cloudless, but true love, the one that stands the test and only grows stronger, is worth every tear shed, every sleepless night, every drop of blood spilled. They walked through the snowfall towards the new life they would build together, step by step, day by day. And Arina knew that no matter what happened next, she had made the right choice.